Most people think the woods are scary because you can't see what's out there. That's not the real problem. The real problem is what you can see clearly and still can't explain. A fire pit that looks freshly used, boot prints that stop and don't continue, a place that feels occupied even when it's empty. You tell yourself it's nothing. You tell yourself there's a logical answer, and you keep walking, because turning around feels dramatic, because you don't want to be the person who panics over something small. But the woods don't need a monster to ruin your night. They just need one detail that shouldn't exist, and a second campsite that wasn't there when you arrived. This is the first of two true-style stories. Both happened deep in the forest. Both started with a normal decision, and both ended with the same realization. We weren't alone. We just didn't understand who got there first. Story 1. Not our camp. I've been camping long enough to know the difference between normal quiet and wrong quiet. Normal quiet is what you get when the sun goes down and the birds finally stop and the air settles. It feels natural. It feels earned. You can still hear little things in the background, leaves shifting, distant water, a branch creaking somewhere far off. Wrong quiet is when the background disappears completely, like somebody turned it off. That weekend, we weren't looking for trouble. Me and my girlfriend Hannah just wanted 2 nights away from work and phones and everything that keeps your brain buzzing. We picked a state forest about an hour and a half from home. Not a national park, not some remote survival trip, just a legal, dispersed camping area we'd used before. I liked it because it was predictable. Trailhead, a decent path, then a smaller spur that cut off toward the creek. You could hike far enough that you wouldn't see anyone, but not so far that it felt stupid. That's the balance. People who don't camp think it's about being brave. It's not. It's about being smart and boring in the right ways. We parked around 4:40 p.m. and started in with 2 packs, a small tent, and a bear canister because the ranger station had a big sign about it. The weather was perfect, cool enough that you'd sleep well, warm enough that you didn't need layers yet. Trees were already starting to thin their leaves, so the forest felt open. Visibility was good. We hiked a little over a mile and found the clearing we remembered. It was one of those spots you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. A flat patch of ground where the underbrush stopped, like the forest had decided to make room. There was a faint ring of stones from old fires. That was normal. A lot of dispersed spots have them. We set up fast. Hannah handled the tent. I cleared sticks and rocks. We didn't talk much because we didn't need to. It was the kind of silence you share with someone you've been around long enough to trust. By 6:30, everything was ready. We ate before dark because I hate cooking when you can't see what you're doing. Then we made a small fire in the existing stone ring. Nothing big, just enough to feel like you're actually camping. The sun slipped behind the trees and the temperature dropped quick. Hannah put on a hoodie. I added a jacket. We sat side by side on a fallen log, watching the flames shrink, listening to the usual nighttime shift. That's when Hannah leaned forward slightly and said, "Did we come in from that direction?" She pointed across the clearing. At first, I didn't understand what she meant. Then I followed her finger and saw it. Another fire ring. Not the old one we were using, a different one, about 30 feet away, near the edge of the trees. It wasn't a random circle of rocks. It was built, tight stones stacked like someone cared. And inside it, a dark patch of ash that looked fresh, not washed out by rain or scattered by wind. Next to it was a log pulled into place like a bench. My first reaction was simple annoyance. Someone else had been here recently, maybe even last night. That wasn't a crime, it was public land, but it did something to the feeling of the clearing. It made it less ours. I stood up and walked over. The closer I got, the more obvious it became. There were small pieces of half-burned wood, charred at the ends, not old, not bleached, not soaked. And in the ash, there was something else, a twist of foil, like someone cooked something and left in a hurry or didn't care. I looked around the ground expecting to see footprints. That's what you always see, boot marks in soft dirt, crushed leaves, a trail leading in and out. But the ground around this ring looked untouched. No obvious scuffs, no clear path leading anywhere in or out. I crouched and brushed my fingers lightly over the ash. It crumbled easily, dry, too dry for something that had been sitting there for weeks. Hannah walked up behind me and didn't speak. I could feel her watching my hands like she was waiting for me to tell her it was nothing. I stood and said the most reasonable thing I could think of. "Someone was here recently." She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the trees. "Do you think they're still here?" I listened, not for footsteps, not for voices, just for that background forest noise that should have been there. But it felt like the woods were holding its breath. And for the first time since we started hiking, I had the uncomfortable thought that we hadn't found a campsite. We'd found someone else's, and they might not be finished with it yet. I told myself not to overthink it. Public forest, shared space. Someone had camped there recently. That was the simplest explanation, the one that required the least imagination. I've learned that camping gets weird fast when you let your mind fill in gaps. Still, something about that second fire ring felt intentional. Not abandoned, not old, not careless. Intentional. We walked back to our side of the clearing and sat down again, but the mood had shifted. Before, the space felt open. Now it felt divided, like we were occupying one half and something unseen occupied the other. "You think they're coming back?" Hannah asked quietly. I shrugged. "If they left gear behind, maybe, but there's nothing there." She was right. No tent stakes in the ground, no trash scattered, no tarp lines, no cooler, no obvious sign someone planned to return. Just that ring of stones and ash. The fire on our side popped sharply, sending a spark up into the air. We both flinched at the same time, then gave each other that embarrassed half-smile people use when they don't want to admit they're tense. Darkness settled in fully around 8:15. That's when the forest should have come alive. You expect crickets, you expect the occasional snap of a twig from something small moving through brush. Sometimes you even hear distant voices if another group is hiking out late. Instead, the quiet thickened. It didn't drop off suddenly. It faded in layers. First, the birds were gone. Then the wind died. Then even the faint rustle of leaves overhead stopped. It wasn't dramatic. It was gradual. But once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. I stood up again and took a slow walk around our tent, mostly to burn off the tight feeling in my chest. I kept glancing toward the second fire ring. It was just visible in the faint glow of our firelight, a darker shape against darker trees. That's when I saw something that didn't match. A glow. Faint, low, orange. I stopped walking. It wasn't big, not like a fire, more like a coal. For half a second, I convinced myself it was just my eyes adjusting. That's common at night. You see things that aren't there. But it didn't move. It didn't blink. It just sat there, exactly where the center of that second fire ring would be. "Hannah," I said quietly. She stood up immediately. "What?" I didn't point. I didn't want to say it out loud yet. "Do you see anything over there?" She squinted into the darkness. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then she inhaled sharply. "Is that—" "Yeah." The glow flickered once, just barely, like something shifted. Not a flame catching, not wind, a disturbance. My brain tried to stay logical. Maybe the ash was still hot. Maybe a buried coal had oxygen reach it. But that didn't explain why it hadn't been glowing before. I had stood right next to that ring 10 minutes ago. It was dark, cold-looking. Now it wasn't. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut across the clearing and landed squarely on the second fire pit. The glow disappeared instantly. No smoke, no ember, no shine, just gray ash. Hannah grabbed my arm. Did it go out? It shouldn't have been on, I said. I walked halfway toward it, flashlight steady. I stopped about 10 feet short. The light washed over the stones and the ash inside. Nothing. No movement. No visible heat. I stepped closer and crouched again. This time, when I brushed the ash lightly with a stick, I felt it. Warm. Not blazing hot, but warm enough that it hadn't been sitting untouched all day. I looked up slowly, scanning the tree line beyond it. There was no tent, no silhouette, no visible person. But the second campsite wasn't abandoned. It had just been used. Recently. And unless someone had been standing there the entire time we were eating and somehow left without making a sound, they were still somewhere close, watching us use their clearing. I stood there longer than I should have, crouched in front of that second fire ring, stick still in my hand, ash still warm under the surface. It wasn't hot enough to burn me, but it was hot enough to tell me something simple and impossible at the same time. Someone had been here very recently. The problem was timing. We had been in the clearing for almost 2 hours, long enough to set up, long enough to cook, long enough for daylight to fade. If someone had lit that fire after we arrived, we would have seen them. We would have heard them. Unless they'd been close the entire time. "Let's go back," Hannah said quietly. Her voice had changed, not panicked, just smaller. I stood up slowly and walked back to our side of the clearing without turning my back to the trees. I kept the flashlight moving in wide arcs, cutting through trunks, underbrush, low branches. Nothing moved. Nothing reflected. No eye shine. No shift of leaves. We sat down again, but neither of us leaned back this time. Our posture was different, alert, balanced. "You think it's just someone messing with us?" she asked quietly. "Why would they?" I said automatically. But that question stuck. Why would they? If someone had wanted to scare us, they could have done it easily. A cough, a snapped branch, a voice from the dark. Instead, whoever had touched that fire ring hadn't revealed themselves. They'd let us discover it. That's when the thought hit me. This wasn't about scaring us. This was about letting us know. I stood up again, this time moving toward the perimeter of the clearing instead of the second fire ring. I kept the beam low, scanning the ground. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just uneven dirt, but the angle of the light changed everything. A footprint. Not a hiking boot, not a sneaker. Bare. Toes pressed into soft soil near the tree line. I moved closer and found another, then another. Not a trail, not a path moving through. They curved, subtle, wide arc, like someone had walked around the clearing, around us. Hannah stepped closer and saw it too. "They were circling," she whispered. The footprints weren't deep, but they were clear enough to follow. They started near the second fire ring, curved along the darker edge of the clearing, then faded into leaf litter where the ground got harder. I checked the direction. The toes were pointed inward, toward our tent, toward where we'd been sitting. I tried to slow my breathing. There are explanations, I told myself. People hike barefoot sometimes. Maybe someone had come through earlier. Maybe the prints were older and the light just made them visible now. But that didn't match the warm ash. It didn't match the timing. And it definitely didn't match what happened next. A sound came from behind us. Not a branch snap, not wind. Breathing. Slow, controlled, close. I turned the flashlight sharply, beam cutting through the darkness near the second fire ring. Nothing. I swung it left, right. Then I caught movement. Not running, not fleeing. A shift of shadow between two trees about 15 yards out. Too tall to be a deer, too still to be a person startled. The beam hit the trunk and stopped. Whatever had been there slipped just out of sight. "Hello?" I called out, louder than I meant to. Silence answered. Not retreating footsteps, not crashing brush, just that suffocating absence of forest noise. Hannah grabbed my arm tightly. "We should leave." I didn't argue, but as I stepped backward toward the tent, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The second fire ring wasn't glowing anymore. It was dark, cold-looking again, like it had never been touched, like it was waiting for us to question what we thought we saw. And the footprints near the edge of the clearing. There were more now. Not just a curve, a closer loop, narrower, tighter. Whoever had walked that circle wasn't just watching anymore. They were adjusting their distance. I stood there longer than I should have. Crouched in front of that second fire ring, stick still in my hand, ash still warm under the surface. It wasn't hot enough to burn me, but it was hot enough to tell me something simple and impossible at the same time. Someone had been here very recently. The problem was timing. We had been in the clearing for almost 2 hours, long enough to set up, long enough to cook, long enough for daylight to fade. If someone had lit that fire after we arrived, we would have seen them, we would have heard them, unless they'd been close the entire time. "Let's go back," Hannah said quietly. Her voice had changed, not panicked, just smaller. I stood up slowly and walked back to our side of the clearing without turning my back to the trees. I kept the flashlight moving in wide arcs, cutting through trunks, underbrush, low branches. Nothing moved, nothing reflected. No eye shine, no shift of leaves. We sat down again, but neither of us leaned back this time. Our posture was different, alert, balanced. "You think it's just someone messing with us?" she asked quietly. "Why would they?" I said automatically. But that question stuck. Why would they? If someone had wanted to scare us, they could have done it easily. A cough, a snapped branch, a voice from the dark. Instead, whoever had touched that fire ring hadn't revealed themselves. They'd let us discover it. That's when the thought hit me. This wasn't about scaring us. This was about letting us know. I stood up again, this time moving toward the perimeter of the clearing instead of the second fire ring. I kept the beam low, scanning the ground. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just uneven dirt, but the angle of the light changed everything. A footprint. Not a hiking boot, not a sneaker. Bare. Toes pressed into soft soil near the tree line. I moved closer and found another, then another. Not a trail, not a path moving through. They curved, subtle, wide arc, like someone had walked around the clearing, around us. Hannah stepped closer and saw it too. "They were circling," she whispered. The footprints weren't deep, but they were clear enough to follow. They started near the second fire ring, curved along the darker edge of the clearing, then faded into leaf litter where the ground got harder. I checked the direction. The toes were pointed inward, toward our tent, toward where we'd been sitting. I tried to slow my breathing. There are explanations, I told myself. People hike barefoot sometimes. Maybe someone had come through earlier. Maybe the prints were older and the light just made them visible now. But that didn't match the warm ash. It didn't match the timing, and it definitely didn't match what happened next. A sound came from behind us. Not a branch snap, not wind. Breathing. Slow, controlled, close. I turned the flashlight sharply, beam cutting through the darkness near the second fire ring. Nothing. I swung it left, right. Then I caught movement. Not running, not fleeing. A shift of shadow between two trees about 15 yards out. Too tall to be a deer, too still to be a person startled. The beam hit the trunk and stopped. Whatever had been there slipped just out of sight. "Hello?" I called out, louder than I meant to. Silence answered. Not retreating footsteps, not crashing brush, just that suffocating absence of forest noise. Hannah grabbed my arm tightly. We should leave. I didn't argue, but as I stepped backward toward the tent, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The second fire ring wasn't glowing anymore. It was dark, cold-looking again, like it had never been touched, like it was waiting for us to question what we thought we saw. And the footprints near the edge of the clearing, there were more now. Not just a curve, a closer loop, narrower, tighter. Whoever had walked that circle wasn't just watching anymore. They were adjusting their distance.
Story 2. The cabin that was already occupied. Most people think the worst thing about living alone in the woods is the isolation. It's not. Isolation is predictable. What isn't predictable is discovering that the silence around your home isn't empty, that someone has been standing just beyond your windows long enough to learn your routines, long enough to understand when you're asleep, and long enough to decide when to move closer. The second story didn't begin with a noise. It began with something that didn't move. And that was the first mistake. I didn't move to the cabin to disappear. I moved there because I thought I understood quiet. There's a difference between quiet and being alone. Quiet is controlled. Being alone is earned. The cabin sat at the end of a narrow gravel road in southern Ohio, about 15 minutes off the nearest highway. It wasn't off-grid. I had power, a weak internet connection, a wood stove. It was simple but stable. That's what I wanted. Predictable. From the front porch, you could see about 100 yards of open slope before the tree line started. Past that, the woods thickened quickly, hardwood and pine closing in like a wall. I liked the visibility. It meant I would always see someone coming. The first time I noticed him, it was late afternoon. The light was still strong, clean, no shadows playing tricks. I was splitting wood near the porch when I felt that subtle shift in awareness, the kind that makes you pause mid-swing without knowing why. I looked up toward the tree line, and there he was, standing between two trunks, far enough that I couldn't make out details, but close enough that I knew it wasn't a tree. He wasn't hiding, he wasn't crouched, he wasn't moving, just standing, still.
At first, I assumed it was another hiker who'd wandered too far off trail. That happens sometimes. People think they can cut through private property and rejoin forest land. I raised a hand casually. He didn't wave back, didn't shift, didn't step, nothing. I walked a few steps forward to get a better angle. He was tall, thin, dark clothing maybe, hard to tell at that distance. I shouted, "You lost?" The sound carried clean across the open slope. No answer, no movement. The posture was wrong. When someone gets caught trespassing, they react. They step back. They pretend they didn't hear. They leave. He stayed exactly where he was. And that's when I felt it. Not fear, assessment. He wasn't observing the land. He was observing the cabin, and by extension, me. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for him to blink, shift weight, scratch his face, anything human. Nothing came. Eventually, I stepped back toward the porch, grabbed my binoculars from inside, and returned. When I raised them to my eyes, the spot between the trees was empty. No retreating figure, no rustling branches, just open forest. I lowered the binoculars slowly and scanned left, right, up and down the slope. Nothing. I told myself it was simple. He left while I was inside, that's all. But something about the way he'd stood there bothered me. It wasn't cautious. It wasn't curious. It was patient. That night, I locked the door. Not because I thought he'd come closer, but because I realized something. He hadn't reacted to being seen, which meant he'd been surprised. And if he wasn't surprised by me noticing him, that meant he'd been standing there long enough to expect it. That night, I kept the porch light on. Not because I thought it would stop anyone, but because darkness outside a lit cabin makes it harder to see in. I wanted the opposite. I wanted to see out. I made dinner like usual, something simple, nothing that required attention. But every few minutes, I found myself glancing toward the front windows. The slope was empty. The tree line was just a wall of shadow. No movement, no silhouette. Still, I didn't close the curtains. Closing them felt like surrendering visibility. Around 10:30, I shut off the living room lights and stood in the dark for a full minute to let my eyes adjust. The forest was clearer now in moonlight. Shapes became depth, edges sharpened. And then I saw him again. Same place, same posture, between the same two trees. Far enough to be safe, close enough to be intentional. He hadn't moved since afternoon, or he had come back to the exact same position. Either possibility was worse. I stepped closer to the glass, slowly. No sudden movements, no aggressive gestures. I wanted to see if proximity changed anything. It didn't. He remained still. I lifted my hand and pressed it lightly against the window. Nothing. Then, very slowly, his head tilted. Not dramatically, just enough to change the angle of his shoulders, like he was studying me from a different perspective. I felt something cold moved through my stomach. That wasn't coincidence. That wasn't someone frozen in indecision. That was awareness. I grabbed my phone and zoomed in with the camera. The image was grainy, pixelated, but I could make out one detail. The footstep on the porch didn't sound heavy. It wasn't a stomp. It wasn't someone trying to break in. It was controlled. The kind of step you take when you already know exactly where the board won't creak.
I didn't move at first. I stood there in the dark, just inside the living room, heart pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. Another step, slower, closer to the door. I could picture it without seeing it, bare foot pressing into the wood, testing weight. The door handle didn't rattle. There was no attempt to force it. Instead, something brushed against the outside of the door, a soft, dragging sound, like fingers trailing down painted wood. I swallowed and forced myself to think clearly. If he wanted in, he would try. This wasn't about entry. This was about presence. I stepped closer to the door, slowly, making sure my boots didn't scrape the floor. The porch light was still on. I could see its glow bleeding faintly under the doorframe. I reached out and locked the deadbolt again, even though I knew it was already locked. The metal click sounded too loud. And that's when it happened. A shadow crossed the bottom of the door, blocking the light for a second, then passing. He was standing directly outside, close enough to hear me breathing. I took one step back, another, and that's when the movement shifted. The sound of a palm pressing flat against the door, not pounding, not pushing, just resting there. I don't know how long it stayed like that. 10 seconds? 30? It felt longer. Then slowly, the pressure slid downward and stopped. I expected retreating steps. Instead, I heard something worse. The sound moved along the porch, past the front window, toward the side of the cabin, circling. He wasn't trying to get in. He was mapping the house. I moved quickly now, cutting through the living room and into the hallway. I grabbed the spare flashlight from the kitchen drawer and turned off the porch light. Instant darkness swallowed the slope outside. If he wanted to see me, he would have to adjust too. The dragging sound stopped. Silence returned. And then I heard it again. Not on the porch. Inside the walls. A faint, hollow shifting, like something pressing lightly against the siding, testing it. I stepped into the bedroom and closed the door quietly behind me. The window above the bed looked out toward the tree line. The slope below it was dark. I didn't want to look, but I did. Slowly, I lifted the curtain just enough to see out. The forest edge was empty, but something was wrong. The angle, the depth. It took my brain a second to process what I was seeing. The figure wasn't at the tree line anymore. He was halfway down the slope, standing directly in line with the bedroom window, closer than before, much closer. He hadn't walked there. I would have seen him. There had been no movement across the yard. He was simply there now, bare feet planted in the grass, arms hanging straight, head slightly tilted again, studying the window, studying me. And this time, there was no distance buffer, no open space between us. If he stepped forward 5 more times, he would be under the window. I let the curtain fall immediately. My chest felt tight. I realized something that made everything colder. He wasn't reacting to me anymore. He was anticipating. Every time I moved inside the cabin, he adjusted his position outside. He wasn't watching randomly. He was responding, which meant he could see more than I thought. and that meant the darkness outside wasn't protecting me. It was protecting him. Then, from directly beneath the bedroom window, a slow exhale. The exhale wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was controlled, like someone testing how close they could get without forcing a reaction. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a second. The sound came again, softer this time, almost curious. He was directly beneath the bedroom window, not 15 yards away, not halfway down the slope, right below me. The glass between us suddenly felt thin, temporary. I stepped back from the window slowly, not wanting the floorboards to creak. My mind was running through options. Call the police? It would take them at least 20 minutes to get out here, maybe more. By the time they arrived, he'd be gone. Confront him? That thought disappeared immediately. There was no logic in opening that door. Wait it out? That assumed he would leave. Another sound broke through the quiet, a soft scraping against the wall. Not climbing, not banging, just fingers dragging upward along the wood siding, slow, deliberate, measuring. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 anyway. My voice came out steady, surprisingly steady as I gave the address. "There's someone outside my cabin," I said. "He's been here all day. He's right outside my bedroom window." The dispatcher asked questions. "Is he armed? Is he attempting entry? Can you see his face?" I answered honestly. No weapon visible, no forced entry, no clear facial features, but he's still here. The dispatcher told me to stay inside, stay on the line, and wait for deputies. I didn't hang up. I stayed in the bedroom with the lights off, sitting against the far wall where I couldn't be seen through the window. Minutes passed. 5, 10. The scraping stopped. Silence returned. Then came the sound I didn't expect. Footsteps. Not on grass, not on the porch, inside the cabin. My brain rejected it immediately. That's impossible. I hadn't heard a door open, hadn't heard glass break, but the sound was unmistakable. A slow step in the hallway, wood floor shifting under weight. The dispatcher was still talking in my ear, asking if I was safe. I didn't answer. Another step. Closer. My eyes locked on the bedroom door. The handle didn't move. There was no shadow under the frame. But I could hear him, standing just outside, listening. The hallway floor creaked once more, then stopped. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Seconds stretched into something longer. The dispatcher's voice faded into background noise, and then knocking. 3 slow taps on the bedroom door, not pounding, not frantic, measured. I felt something in me break at that moment, because if he was knocking on the bedroom door, then he wasn't outside anymore. Red and blue lights finally flashed through the thin edges of the curtain. The dispatcher told me deputies were arriving. The knocking stopped instantly. I didn't move until I heard actual voices outside, real voices, firm, calling my name. I opened the bedroom door slowly. The hallway was empty. The front door was still locked. Windows intact, no broken glass, no damage. The deputies cleared the cabin, every room, every closet, under the bed. Nothing.
They searched the perimeter outside, too. No footprints on the porch, no marks beneath the bedroom window, no sign anyone had been there at all. I told them everything. The standing figure, the circling, the dragging, the knocking. They took notes. They searched the slope toward the tree line, and that's where they found it. One set of barefoot tracks, starting at the edge of the woods, moving down toward the cabin, stopping directly beneath my bedroom window. And then, nothing. No return path, no second direction, just an end, as if the ground swallowed him. The deputies couldn't explain that. They suggested someone had doubled back on harder ground, maybe stepped into their own prints, maybe climbed a tree, maybe left earlier than I thought. All logical answers, all incomplete. I didn't stay in the cabin after that night. I packed the essentials the next morning and left. But here's the part I haven't been able to explain. When I reviewed the security camera footage from the porch the next day, there was nothing. No figure at the tree line, no movement across the slope, no one on the porch. But at 2:13 a.m., the camera recorded 3 clear knocks on the bedroom door from inside the hallway. And the hallway camera never showed anyone standing there. If you're still here, ask yourself something simple. If someone can stand outside your home all day without reacting to being seen, how long were they there before you noticed? And how many times have you assumed silence meant safety? If you listen to the end, you belong here.